Hello. My name is Nadine Calloway, and 3 days before what should have been the happiest day of my life, I mailed 4 envelopes, each sealed with more truth than my family had ever spoken aloud. One to my mother, one to my father, one to my sister, one to the man who almost married me. Inside each was a copy of the recording, the one where they plotted my erasure like it was a PR strategy. Inside each was a photo of the chapel I chose without them. And one line. Just one. This was the life you were invited to. You declined. I turned toward the exit. And someone stepped directly into my path. Maylie stood in the archway, slightly off balance, her glass dangling between 2 fingers like she wasn't sure if she planned to drink it or use it as a weapon. Her lipstick was smudged, just enough to make her look like she'd been kissed or careless. She smiled. Running off already? But it's your party, isn't it? Her tone dripped condescension, but it wasn't new. That voice had followed me since we were kids, too sugary on the surface, too sharp underneath. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. I tried to step around her. She swayed with me, blocking the path. Maylise, I started, keeping my voice low. Why do you always make everything about you? She snapped, louder this time. Her arm jerked upward. Before I could flinch, her drink hit my face. Cold, sticky, sharp citrus and champagne up my nose, down my neck.
People gasped.
Someone dropped a fork. The jazz trio hit a wrong chord before stumbling back into their melody. I stood there, drenched, glass shards scattered at my feet. Time slowed, but not enough to stop what came next. Mother's heels clicked against the marble. Nadine, what did you say to upset her this time? Her voice wasn't surprised. It was rehearsed. A dull ringing started in my ears. I hadn't said anything. Nothing that justified this. But they didn't care. They never did. And in that moment, I wasn't even angry, just tired. The crowd around us returned to their crab cakes and conversation like it hadn't happened. The server quietly bent to collect the broken glass, eyes avoiding mine. Maylise turned and walked back to her table like she hadn't just humiliated me on purpose. It wasn't rage that washed over me. It was silence. Deep, sticky, swallowing silence. 14 years old. Choir recital. I remembered standing on that stage in my best dress, bow in my hair, waiting for my cue. Maylise threw a tantrum in the aisle. Mom had pulled her into her lap, whispering comfort, while Dad told me, "We'll reschedule something just for you." We never did. Back in the present, I reached for a cocktail napkin from the buffet table and wiped my face. The linen smelled like lemon oil and cold cuts. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. Dad approached next, straightening his tie, jaw tight. "We'll talk about this later. Don't ruin tonight." I looked up at him. My voice didn't work, but my heart thudded once, then twice. I wasn't ruining anything. I was the one being ruined. I turned away and left the room. Not out the front door. I needed air. I stepped onto the wraparound veranda, where the water glowed under Charleston's soft skyline. A breeze off the water caught the wet strands of my hair. It should have felt cleansing. It didn't. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I almost ignored it, but instinct won. I pulled it out. Email. Subject. Postponement notice. For your best interest. It was from my mother. Formal tone. No greeting. No affection. No warning. "We've put your wedding on hold until you can prove you can coexist with your sister. Emotions have been high. Let's regroup when everyone is calmer."
Calmer.
My wedding wasn't postponed. I was. My hand tightened around the phone until the corner dug into my palm. I didn't feel it. Looking down at that message, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped pretending. I went back inside. The projector had started rolling the engagement slideshow. The room dimmed. Laughter rose. On screen, Melis as a toddler in a tutu. Melis holding her diploma. Melis blowing out candles. No pictures of me. Not one. Not even from this year. If I don't leave now, this room will finish swallowing me whole. The velvet of the carpet muffled my steps, but not my rage. I left the venue that night without saying goodbye. 3 days later, I found myself pulling into my parents' driveway, hoping, foolishly, that we were meeting to clear the air. I should have known better. My mother's texts had been clipped, polite, almost bureaucratic. We need to go over a few logistics. Nothing about my feelings. Nothing about the spilled champagne or the missing photos. Just logistics. I stepped inside, expecting a tense conversation. Instead, I walked into a staged performance. Light stands glowed in every corner. Tripods crowded the hall. White floral arches lined the living room walls like they'd been hired to replace actual affection. For a moment, I thought I'd crashed someone else's event. Then I saw my mother sweep across the room with a clipboard pressed to her chest. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. Everything in her posture said, "You're an afterthought." "What is all this?" I asked, voice steady even though my stomach tightened. "We figured it was best to proceed without stress," she said. "Just photos for the family album."
Stress.
That was their new word for me. A neat box they could tuck me into, set aside, and label as problem solved. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. I moved deeper into the room and caught sight of the photographer adjusting his lens. His eyes skimmed over me like I was part of the decor. When he finally spoke, he nodded toward the storage room. "Could you grab the reflector panel? We're running a little behind."
He thought I worked for them.
And no one corrected him. Not my father, who was fixing his cufflinks by the fireplace. Not my mother, who had been rehearsing control for years. Not the woman posing under soft lights. Melis. She spun gracefully in a pale ivory dress, laughing at something the photographer said. Her hair fell in the kind of effortless waves you only get from stylists who aren't paid by you. She looked radiant, because she always did when she was stealing something that wasn't hers. She noticed me watching and flashed a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Don't worry. We got it from here." My mother shrugged at me, the way someone might shrug at a late Amazon package. "You weren't scheduled today, darling." Scheduled. As if I needed an appointment to belong to my own family. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. A soft melody drifted through the living room, gentle notes from a string arrangement I recognized immediately. It was the waltz I had chosen months ago for my walk down the aisle. I had imagined that slow, careful march toward Thane, toward a new start that didn't require me to shrink. But Melis had already claimed it. She swayed in rhythm, letting the music settle around her like a custom-made crown. They were replacing me in pieces. First the date, then the frame, now the music. I backed away and stepped outside for air, but the world didn't feel any wider. I drove home numb, the kind of numb that hides a deeper bruise, the kind that sinks under your ribs and waits. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from a friend. No greeting, just a photo. "Did you see this?" An early print of the invitation card. Guest of honor, Mr. and Mrs. Calloway and Ms. Melis Strexler. My name was nowhere, and when I zoomed closer, a chill spread along my neck. They didn't even bother to misspell me this time. They replaced me entirely. Natalie Caldwell. Not a typo, a deliberate rewrite. It stung more than it should have. Maybe because it looked so tidy on paper, as if I'd never existed. That's where it all started. A memory surfaced, my 8th birthday. I had leaned across the kitchen counter, ready to blow out my candle. Before I could take a breath, Maylee swooped in and beat me to it. My parents laughed. Oh, she's just excited. Let her have her turn. But they never relit the candle. Never asked if I wanted a new wish. They taught me early. Wanting space made me selfish. And here I was, decades later, still living inside the shadow of that lesson. I closed my eyes and exhaled through the ache. I didn't cry. I just walked to the desk drawer where I kept the RSVP cards I designed myself. Thick card stock. Embossed edges. Hours of choosing fonts and colors, imagining a life where I mattered. I picked one up, ran my thumb along the gold lettering. Then I tore it cleanly down the center. The sound was soft, but inside me, something cracked wide open. If I'm not the bride anymore, I whispered, I'm not the daughter either. The room felt still when I said it. Not empty, just honest. The room felt still when I said it. Not empty, just honest. I didn't stay long after that. I folded the torn card halves into the trash, grabbed my keys, and walked out of my apartment without bothering to turn off the lamp. The night air pressed against my skin like a reminder that something inside me had shifted for good. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I couldn't keep standing still. A week later, I found myself back at the family house. I told myself I was only picking up the last few things I'd left behind, but the truth was more fragile. Some small part of me wanted one moment of decency. One moment where someone looked at me and didn't see inconvenience. I unlocked my old bedroom door and breathed in slowly. The dim lamp on the dresser cast a soft glow, illuminating the garment bag on my bed. I should have stopped right there. But I walked toward it, fingertips brushing the plastic as if it might burn me. I unzipped it. The gown inside wasn't the one I'd chosen. The original neckline, clean, elegant, modest, had been altered into something I'd never wear. The bodice was tighter, the waist smaller. A label stitched roughly near the zipper read, size 2, MD. My breath steadied, but not with calm. It was my dress. Until it wasn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the fabric spill across my lap. For a long moment, I didn't move,
Didn't speak. Didn't cry.
My silence wasn't weakness this time. It was announcement. I could feel the truth forming like a bruise under my ribs. I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been erased. The door swung open without warning, the knob hitting the wall. Maylee stepped in holding her phone, the screen lighting her face from below. Why do you make everything so difficult? She said, like it was an everyday complaint. You touched my gown, I replied. My voice sounded calm, even to me. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You act like this is all yours. It never was. Not the music. Not the dress. Not even the man. Her words hit harder than they should have. Maybe because she meant them. Maybe because she believed them. I rose from the bed, ready to walk past her, ready to stop playing this game. She kept winning. But she stepped into my path. Move, I said quietly. She didn't. She shoved me. Hard. The dresser corner caught my spine, and before I could catch my breath, her hand swung out again, the ring she wore cutting across my cheek. The metallic taste in my mouth was instant. I curled instinctively, not because I feared her, because the sting shocked me. Her ring cut my skin. I tasted metal, not rage. The thud must have been louder than I realized, because a moment later, my mother was in the doorway. Her eyes landed on me first, on the blood, then on Maylee's behind me, tears already forming, trembling hands hiding her face. Nadine, my mother said sharply, what have you done to yourself now? I pushed myself upright. She hit me. And you probably said something to provoke it, she snapped. You always do.
Her words didn't stab.
They didn't even slice. They simply confirmed what had been true all along. There was no version of the story where I wasn't the villain of their imagination. I stood, walked past them both, and shut myself in the bathroom. I turned on the faucet and watched red water swirl down porcelain. Blood trailed under my fingernails. I wiped my cheek with the back of my hand, smearing the mix into something unrecognizable. I stared at my reflection. At 10 years old, I had dropped a glass in the kitchen. It shattered. Before I could even speak, Melis burst into tears, claiming I'd pushed her. My father didn't ask questions. He just told me disappointment was unbecoming in the older sister. I took the punishment because that was the role given to me. That was the first time I bled for her. Tonight was just tradition. The lamp flickered, as if agreeing with me. I opened the vanity drawer and took out a lighter I used for candles. Then I walked back into the bedroom with quiet steps. The dress lay where I'd left it, soft, innocent, pretending it was meant for me. I lifted the hem toward the flame. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a small curl of fabric darkened, smoke rising in a thin line. The fire caught quicker than I expected, heat licking up the gown like it was hungry. I dropped it into the sink and turned on the faucet just enough to control the burn. The ivory fabric shriveled, blackened, curled in on itself until it looked nothing like what it had been. They gave her my dress. I gave her its ashes. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. Not healed, just lighter, like I'd finally stopped pretending the wound wasn't there. The smoke from the burned gown still clung to me days later, faint but impossible to forget, like a truth I could no longer unknow. 4 days passed, quiet on the surface, but I felt the shift inside me every time I caught my reflection. Something in my eyes had hardened, not from anger, but from clarity. So when my parents invited me to what they called a healing dinner, I already sensed the trap. They never invited me to heal, only to perform. I stood outside the reception room, smoothing the sleeve of my blouse over the bruise near my collarbone. The fabric hid the mark, but not the memory. Through the double doors, I heard laughter, silverware tapping china, the kind of polished chatter families use when they want the neighbors to think everything is fine. I pushed the door open and walked in. The room tilted the moment I crossed the threshold. Maybe it was the warm lights bouncing off the champagne flutes, or the sharp glances that slid past me instead of landing on me. My mother stood near the buffet, smiling like a hostess at a charity gala, as if no one had bled 3 nights ago. She waved her arm toward the guests, whispering to a neighbor something that made both women glance my way with polite pity. They were about to fix the narrative by cracking mine open first. I scanned the room. No sign of Melis yet, but her presence hummed under every conversation. I could feel eyes flicking toward my sleeves, searching for bruises they could label emotional instability. I stepped closer to the bar, trying not to let my pulse quicken. Looking back now, I should have known exactly what they were doing. On the far wall stood a large whiteboard titled, Order of Family Remarks. 3 names were written in careful script. Warren Calloway, Marjorie Calloway, Melis Drexler. My name wasn't misspelled this time. It simply wasn't there. A relative leaned toward me, her perfume powdery and familiar. They told me this event was for the daughter, who's been a real blessing, she whispered. It's wonderful to see families so united. United. The words scraped across my ribs like sandpaper. Before I could respond, my father tapped a spoon against his glass. Everyone, he announced, we're here tonight to show that family harmony is our foundation. Harmony. They tossed that word around the way some people tossed confetti, only pretty from far away. He beckoned me forward. Nadine, come stand by your sister. I felt my stomach tighten. Still I walked, step by step. Not because I agreed, but because the entire room watched with a hunger I couldn't place. Melis appeared from behind a group of guests, her eyes already glistening. She knew how to summon tears the way others summon breath. She moved toward me, her lower lip trembling. My mother leaned in close, her whisper cutting through me like a blade.
Kneel.
For her. And this can all go back to normal. Normal. As if normal had ever been kindness. I hesitated, just long enough for the silence to stretch into something hostile. Every guest watched. Every face waited. I felt the weight of their expectation bearing down like a command. I didn't feel my knees hit the hardwood, but I felt every pair of eyes land like stone. I lowered my head, not out of submission, but because keeping my gaze steady took more strength than I had in that moment. The room exhaled, as if relieved I had performed my part. Melis let a single tear fall, placing her hand dramatically on my shoulder. Someone near the back murmured, not bothering to soften the comment, "Honestly, I always thought Melis was the real daughter anyway." The words slid through the room and settled deep in my spine. I raised my head slowly and looked at the wine glass in my hand. The liquid rippled slightly. My hand did not. If this was forgiveness, then hell must be a banquet. I rose. The chatter paused, like a skipped heartbeat. My father turned toward me, irritation rising behind his forced smile. "Where are you going?" he asked. I met his stare without blinking. "Thank you for making it clear." A hush fell, sharp, startled, cutting through the thin veil of performative kindness. I turned and walked out of the room, not toward the exit, but toward the staircase leading to my childhood bedroom. With every step up, I felt something shedding from me, years of swallowing words, years of folding myself small to fit a narrative that was never mine. I reached the top landing and paused, hearing the clatter of dishes and the dull hum of conversations attempting to resume. By Monday morning, my name had vanished from more than just the whiteboard. By Monday morning, my name had vanished from more than just the whiteboard. It disappeared from conversations, from messages, from the pauses where people usually fill space with warmth. I woke with the unsettling feeling that the silence around me had shape and weight, the way humidity clings to the air before a storm. I sat by the window of my small apartment, watching the Charleston Marina drift through soft afternoon light. My coffee sat untouched, turning cold long before I noticed. The phone buzzed beside me. I hesitated before pressing play on the voicemail. Thane's mother spoke with careful politeness, every word wrapped in concern but not empathy. "We understand you need time," she said, "but we're worried." The sudden silence, the confusion around the venue, "We just want to make sure you're okay."
Okay.
People asked that when they already believed the answer was no. I dialed Thane before I could talk myself out of it. The call connected on the second ring. "Nadine," he said, voice level, 2 level. "What did she tell you?" I asked. My fingers curled against my knee, grounding me. He exhaled. "Your mother called us. She said you were struggling emotionally, that you'd been making erratic decisions." Erratic. That was their new label for me. "And you believed her?" Silence dropped like a hammer between us. It stretched and thinned until it snapped something inside me. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he finally said. His doubt pierced deeper than the slap Melis had given me. Not because he meant to hurt me, but because he didn't try to see me beyond the story my family had crafted. They didn't just strip me from the ceremony. They stripped me from myself. We hung up without resolution. The quiet afterward felt heavier than the conversation. Looking back now, I should have realized that moment was a turning point. Evening settled in, and I tried distracting myself by sorting through emails. That's when a message from my closest friend appeared, brief and breathless. Have you seen this? Attached was a screenshot. There she was, Maëlys, smiling into a mirror, wearing my engagement ring like it belonged on her hand. The caption read, "Grateful to Mom for always knowing what's best." The comments poured in below. Congrats. Is this real? When's the date? I stared at the screen until the edges blurred. She wore it like a trophy from a war I didn't know we were fighting. A tremor moved through my chest, not rage, recognition. This was intentional, strategic, cruel in a way that required planning. I put the phone down and opened my laptop, navigating to the shared Google Drive folder labeled Wedding Planning. The icon spun for a moment before the contents loaded. The main album was still titled Maëlys and Family. My pulse quickened as I clicked through. Photo by photo, an absence grew clearer. Every image of me from childhood to engagement photos taken just months earlier was gone. Deleted. Only one picture remained. A group shot from a barbecue years ago. The outline of my arm rested on someone's shoulder, but the rest of me had been carefully cropped out. Even my digital past had been trimmed to fit their version of truth. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. I closed the folder, then deleted it entirely. Watching the icon vanish didn't bring satisfaction. It simply brought stillness. Then I opened my phone's contacts. One at a time, I removed the numbers I'd clung to for too long. Mother, father, home. Finally, I hovered over Thane's name. My thumb didn't tremble. I pressed delete. My notes app blinked open next. I typed a single sentence, crisp and steady. You can't disappear me if I walk away first. The room felt different after that. Not safer, not warmer, but clearer. I wasn't undoing years of pain. I was refusing to carry it 1 minute longer. The room felt clearer after I wrote that sentence, as if carving truth into my phone somehow carved a boundary into my life. I closed the Notes app, set the device aside, and let the quiet settle around me. It wasn't peaceful, exactly, but it didn't hurt the way silence used to. It felt like something unclenching, something letting go. A week later, I found myself staring at my bedroom ceiling at dawn, realizing there were conversations I could no longer avoid. The first one was with Aunt Corinne. She had always been the only person in the family who spoke to me without calculation, without that subtle tilt of the head people use when they're deciding where to place blame. I dialed her number before I lost the nerve. "Nadine?" she answered, voice warm but lined with hesitation. I swallowed. "I need to ask you something, and I don't want you to feel pressured." A long breath crackled through the speaker. "I know what happened. Your mother called me." "Of course she did. What did she say?" I asked. "She said you were being dramatic, that you'd upset the family, that you needed intervention." Corinne paused. "But I don't believe that." Her certainty should have soothed me, but instead it tightened something in my throat. "I wish I could stand beside you," she continued, her tone dropping to a whisper, "but your mother threatened to pull the inheritance from my care if I meddled. She said I was enabling you. Even my anchor is tied down. She can't control you forever," I murmured. "Oh, honey," Corinne sighed. "She's been controlling all of us for years." We were too used to the storm to realize we were standing in the rain. My eyes burned, not from sadness but recognition. Before hanging up, she said one last thing, a soft truth that folded into me like a promise. "You don't need us to be whole, Nadine. You never did." Hope doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just whispers, then fades. I sat with the quiet for a few minutes longer, then opened my laptop to check emails. One subject line froze my breath. "You don't know me, but I was in the room." The message contained an audio file and a transcript. I clicked play. My parents' voices filled the speakers, low and deliberate. Marjorie. If she steps back, the focus stays on Maylis. Warren. Keep pushing. She'll withdraw. She always does. Maylis. Good. Then I'll have the spotlight without forcing anything. Mother again. If she walks away, we win twice. My pulse thudded slow and heavy. I replayed the last sentence, each word striking bone. They wanted me gone. Not because I failed them, but because my absence polished their image. I read the transcript carefully, line by line, feeling each word settle like a stone in a jar. Clear. Intentional. Unmistakable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't family tension or clashing personalities. This was strategy. And I finally had proof. I printed the transcript, folded it cleanly, placed it in a plain envelope, and sealed it without ceremony. Then I grabbed my keys and drove to the county records office. The clerk barely glanced up when I handed her the documents. I need to update my file, I said. She nodded. Remove or add? Remove. My voice didn't shake. All parental permissions. Emergency contacts. Power of attorney. And I'd like to request a restraining alert on large events. Anything with more than 50 guests. She raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. Paperwork slid across the counter. Pens clicked. Stamps landed. And with every signature, I felt something loosening inside me. If I'm not allowed to belong in their future, then I reclaim my name and mine. When I returned to my car, sunlight washed across the dashboard, bright enough to sting. I blinked hard, then exhaled, long, steady, necessary. There was one more place I needed to go. A tiny chapel hidden behind a row of oak trees near the bay. I discovered it years ago during a walk, back when I believed in quiet dreams no one else needed to approve. I hadn't told a soul about it, not even Thane. The moment I stepped inside, warm light filtered through stained glass and slid across the floor in deep reds and golds. Not extravagant, not showy, just honest. I approached the small office. I'd like to book the space, I said. Full reservation. For how many guests? The coordinator asked. 1, I replied. Then, after a beat, and a planner. No family, no press, no apologies. Her smile was gentle. Then let's make it the way you want. I signed the contract without hesitation. My hand didn't tremble. Not once. My last stop was a boutique I'd never dared enter before, a place known for bold colors and dresses that belonged to women unafraid to take up space. Deep inside the store, a gown caught my eye. A rich navy fabric that shimmered without competing for attention. Strong, steady, unforgettable. I ran my fingers along the seam and felt something settle in my chest. This was mine, not handed to me, not altered behind my back, not stolen for someone else's spotlight. White was never mine, but power. That I'll wear proudly. The navy gown stayed with me long after I left the boutique. Not physically, I hadn't picked it up yet, but in the way a decision can sit inside your chest like a lit candle. I drove home with the radio off, letting the quiet stretch across the car. There was no dread in that silence. Only readiness. The kind that comes when you've finally stopped asking permission to exist. 2 weeks passed after I severed the last legal ties to my parents. I didn't hear from any of them, not a text, not a voicemail. Their absence didn't sting the way it once would have. Instead, it felt like stepping into a room where the windows had finally been opened. 3 days before the wedding, I woke before dawn. The sky outside my apartment window was still dark, but the world felt strangely steady. I sat up, noticing the faint outline of the navy gown hanging from the closet door. Its silhouette was both soft and fierce, like something reclaiming its space. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not from joy. Joy felt far away, but from clarity. I knew exactly what needed to happen. I made tea, then sat at my kitchen table with a stack of stationery I'd bought months ago. Heavy cardstock, clean edges, honest paper. I uncapped a pen and began writing by hand, letters that weren't pleas or explanations, but declarations. 4 envelopes. 1 for my parents, 1 for Maelys, 1 for Thane, 1 for Aunt Corinne. Inside each envelope I placed a printed copy of the audio transcript, a photograph of the new wedding venue, the chapel untouched by their influence, a guest list with 0 family attendees clearly highlighted, and a note written in the same steady script. This was the life you were invited to. You declined. Looking back now, I should have recognized how final those words were. By noon, I'd sealed the envelopes and laid them out in a neat row. My handwriting looked calm, almost gentle. The truth beneath it was not. While I packaged the letters, my phone lit up with a notification. An Instagram story. Maelys had posted again. Some people are so bitter they'll burn everything just to pretend it was their choice, she wrote over a photo of herself sipping a latte. No mention of the ring she'd stolen. No mention of the gown she'd altered. No mention of the bruise she'd caused. She didn't need to mention any of it. Her entire life was a curated performance. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. Instead, I opened my email and uploaded every piece of evidence I'd gathered, the transcript, the photos, the altered documents. With a few clicks, I created a scheduled delivery, 1 hour after my ceremony began. It was the same hour my family expected to stand center stage. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity delivered on time. That evening, I returned home to a blinking voicemail notification. I pressed play with the same steadiness I'd found earlier in the day. My mother's voice filled the room.
Soft.
Controlled.
Practiced.
It's still not too late, she began. We can walk you down the aisle. We can fix this, sweetheart. Fix this. I let the message finish before deleting it. Once, her voice would have split me open. Now, it sounded like someone knocking on a door they no longer had keys to. What they call fixing, I now recognize as breaking in. When the message disappeared from my phone, my breath felt easier. Not entirely free, but honest. I went to my desk and opened the wedding planning software I had once poured hours into. Each guest entry had a small box next to the name. I scrolled until I found the section labeled Family Participants. Next to each name, Warren, Marjorie, and Maelys, I unchecked the box. The action was small. The feeling was not. At the bottom of the screen was a button I'd never used. Lock invitations. I clicked it. The confirmation message popped up. Are you sure? Locked invitations cannot be changed. Yes, I said aloud. The word didn't echo. It settled. Tomorrow, I've become someone they don't get to know. I leaned back in my chair, fingers resting lightly on the desk. Outside, the city hummed with its usual evening rhythm. Cars passing, someone laughing in the hallway, a horn sounding in the distance. Life was moving forward without hesitation. For the first time in a long while, so was I. By the time I stood up, the envelopes were ready, the emails queued, the guest list irrevocably sealed. Everything that needed to be said had been written in ink or coded in timestamps. And by morning, they realized it was already too late. The chapel was quiet when I arrived, quiet in the way that felt sacred, not staged. No aisle runner, no string quartet, no seating chart with names I'd never written. Just soft light through tall windows, the rustle of trees beyond the open doors, and the faintest sound of water brushing the shore nearby. I stepped inside, the navy gown flowing around my ankles like something dignified and earned. There was no veil.
No bouquet.
Justice, my dog, padded behind me with quiet paws and settled near the front row, as if he too understood the weight of this moment. The seats were sparsely filled, each guest handpicked, not out of obligation but respect. No one whispered. No one posed for pictures. Even Aunt Corinne, seated quietly near the front, didn't cry. She just nodded when our eyes met, and that was enough. This wasn't a replacement wedding. It was the only real one. The officiant took her place, opened a small binder, and spoke without preamble or pretense. I didn't look around for faces that weren't there. Their absence was intentional, curated. I had made space for peace by removing the war. When it was time for vows, I faced forward. There was no groom. There was no script. Just me, standing in a dress I had chosen, in a place no one else had claimed. I vow, I began, never to make myself small again. Not for peace. Not for appearances. Not to preserve an image that was never mine to begin with. The words weren't rehearsed. They rose from the parts of me that had gone unspoken for too long. To the woman I used to be, I said, "Thank you for surviving. But I'm not her anymore." The chapel was silent.
Not awkwardly.
Reverently. As I stepped down from the front, I didn't feel eyes following me. I didn't need applause. I had walked into a room without shame and walked out without guilt. That was enough. Outside, the sky had shifted. Pale blue dipped into lavender along the horizon. The wind picked up slightly, brushing against my bare arms. I knew what time it was, even without looking at the clock. Emails were being opened. Files were being read. Somewhere across the city, for inboxes chimed. Marjorie's hands probably trembled as she read the line. "This was the life you were invited to. You declined." Warren would say nothing. He never did when silence worked in his favor. Melis might throw her laptop. She was always theatrical when the spotlight wasn't hers.
And Thane.
Thane would open the transcript, listen to the recording, and call. I wouldn't answer. That truth had already spoken for itself. Back behind the chapel, near the water's edge, I slipped off my earrings and held them in my palm. They had once belonged to my grandmother, passed down with quiet pride. I didn't feel sadness letting them go. I felt completion. I unfolded the note I'd written 2 days ago, edges creased from second-guessing. To the girl who wanted to be loved by people who never learned how. I dropped it into the tide and watched the paper drift, then disappear. Not swallowed, not drowned, just released. Looking back now, I should have written that letter years ago. Barefoot, I walked through the chapel garden. Each blade of grass soft against my skin, each step unfamiliar but mine. My phone buzzed once. I didn't rush to check it. When I did, I saw the name. I didn't smile.
I didn't cry.
I simply powered it off. I wasn't the bride they expected. I was the woman they lost. The message history stayed blank for 2 weeks.
No epaleji. No explanation.
Not even the kind of half-hearted, image-saving outreach my family used to send when they wanted to appear compassionate. Morning after morning, my inbox remained empty. At first, I checked it out of habit. Later, I checked it to confirm a truth. They were choosing silence, the same way they once chose spectacle. Then, one afternoon, a single forwarded email arrived, sent from Thane. No subject line.
No greeting.
Just a short message buried between spaces. You deserved better. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I read it twice, once with my breath caught, and once with my breath steady. Then I archived it. Not out of spite, out of acceptance. There was no version of my life where a man unsure of my truth could lead me into a future worth building. Looking back now, I should have known that silence wasn't rejection. It was release. Justice nudged at my leg, reminding me it was time for a run. We jogged down the harbor path, the early light brushing gold across the water. My steps fell into rhythm, not fast, not forced, just consistent. A steady pulse that mirrored the new cadence of my days. Each inhale felt cleaner than the last, as though the air itself wasn't filtered through expectation anymore. Afterward, I drove to the mentorship center, a place for young women estranged from their families. The room smelled faintly of coffee and cheap carpet cleaner, but it held something gentler than any house I grew up in. I sat in the circle, listening as stories spilled out. Girls cast aside for loving the wrong person, for not fitting the mold, for refusing to shrink. One girl, barely 20, asked me quietly, "How do you forgive people who ruined everything?" I didn't answer right away. I felt her question settle into my bones the way truth often does. Slow, patient, undeniable. "You don't," I finally said. "You just stop needing anything from them." Her shoulders lowered as if someone had finally given her permission to breathe. Later that day, when I returned home, I found a folded newspaper in my mailbox. No return address. No note. Just the Charleston Daily tucked neatly under a grocery flyer. I flipped it open, not expecting anything. Then, the headline caught my breath. Local woman's solo wedding sends shockwaves through Charleston's wedding industry. Beneath it, a photo, not of me, but of the chapel entrance, framed by soft evening light. The article described the ceremony, calling it quiet and startlingly beautiful. One line stood out. She looked peaceful, like someone who had chosen herself. I stood in my kitchen with the paper spread across the island, letting the words settle. I didn't rewrite the rules. I just stopped auditioning for their script. As dusk rolled in, I walked to my bedroom dresser. The drawer creaked slightly as I pulled it open. Inside, tucked beneath old notes and receipts, was a small birthday candle. Pink, short, unblemished. Never lit. My 8th birthday flickered through my mind, Melis blowing out my candle before I inhaled. My parents' laughter. Their insistence that it didn't matter. I had believed them because children believe everything when it comes wrapped in parental certainty. I picked up the candle and carried it to the kitchen. The lighter clicked once. A flame bloomed. I stood there, watching that tiny glow flicker against the fading daylight. Then, slowly, deliberately, I blew it out, this time for myself. Sometimes reclaiming your story is that simple. Sometimes it's that quiet. When night settled over Charleston, I opened the last of my legal documents. Emergency contacts. Beneficiaries. Permissions. The remnants of a family tie that had always been more rope than lifeline. I updated the emergency contact line myself. I updated the beneficiary, a nonprofit that funded therapy and housing for estranged women. I signed the bottom of the page with a hand steadier than it had been in years. My final note of the night went into my journal, a place where my words weren't edited or dismissed. They may never regret what they did, but I will never regret walking away. I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. The room darkened, but not heavily, the kind of darkness that comes before dawn. If they ever remember me, I hope it's in silence, the way I finally remembered myself. Before I go, let me leave you with this. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they're wearing the same last name. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And power? It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet, in the choice to no longer play a part in someone else's performance. Have you ever had to cut off someone you loved just to finally hear your own voice? Tell me in the comments. I read every story. And if you want more truths like this, subscribe to the channel Because I'm not done telling mine.